former candidate for the U.S. Senate, longtime radio talk show host, author, and conservative policy advocate.
Justices to the Supreme Court, the left has been in open panic.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Impeachment, Russian infiltration, lynching, Goebbels, Pierre Delecto. Just another routine week in the D.C. swamp. Welcome back in to Liberty Nation Radio, a production of LibertyNation.com and heard from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. Democrats continue to conduct impeachment-related investigations in secret 2 floors below ground level in the U.S. Capitol as Trump officials dig in against what the president has called a lynching. Senator Mitt Romney is made to look the fool attacking the president for pulling out of Syria just before Trump announces a so-called permanent ceasefire in that region. Hillary Clinton re-enters the fray with head-shaking paranoid remarks as speculation arises that she wants to run for president again. We'll discuss all of this with LibertyNation.com political columnist Joe Schaeffer. Plus, Brent Bozell is back to discuss the rapidly growing threat of social media censorship of conservatives. And constitutional lawyer and LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor Scott Cosenza joins us for Talkin' Liberty, featuring the arrest of a young man in Connecticut for saying a word.
Say what? Say what? Say what? One more time.
We commence the proceedings with our signature segment, Say What? That's when we roll out an assembly line of wacky, astonishing, damnable, and ultimately revealing things uttered by politicians and the chattering class. She is back. But for how long? Hillary Clinton continued the mental meltdown that overtook her after suffering the most infamous defeat in American history with unhinged conspiracy theories, while speculation somehow swirls that she's actually considering running for president again. Hillary went on a podcast this week and made some accusations that left even her friends shaking their heads and wondering whether she simply lost her grip, especially when it comes to the Russians.
I'm not making any predictions, but I think they've got their eye on somebody who's currently in the Democratic primary and are grooming her to be the third-party candidate. She's the favorite of the Russians. They have a bunch of, sites and bots and other ways of supporting her so far. And that's assuming Jill Stein will give it up, which she might not, because she's also a Russian asset.
Jill Stein? You mean the obscure Green Party candidate who sued for a recount after the 2016 election trying to help Hillary? But now she's a Russian asset, okay? And Tulsi Gabbard, combat veteran who opposes our involvement in Syria and thus must be a Russian asset, of course she is. Those jaw-dropping remarks suddenly elevated the below-the-radar campaign of Tulsi Gabbard to the front page, especially after Tulsi struck back hard.
People warned me in 2016 that my endorsement of Bernie Sanders would be the end of my quote-unquote political career. They said Clinton will never forget that she and her rich and powerful friends, her allies in politics and in the media, will make sure that you are destroyed. But if they can falsely portray me as a traitor, then they can do it to anyone. And in fact, that's exactly the message that they want to get across to you. That if you stand up against Hillary and the party power brokers, if you stand up to the rich and powerful elite and the war machine, they will destroy you and discredit your message.
Yeah, that pretty much sums it up, huh? But even as she considers entering the 2020 race in the belief that none of the current Democratic candidates can beat Trump, Hillary has blamed everyone but herself for her stunning defeat in 2016, including the email scandal which broke loose after she deleted more than 30,000 emails subpoenaed by Congress. And now she's got the media feeling guilty about it all, including the notorious Trump basher on CNN, the once respectable Jeffrey Toobin.
This is also a story about the news media, about how much time we spent on that. And that's something that I have felt a great deal of personal responsibility for, because I talked about the emails here in CNN. I wrote about it in the New Yorker. And I think I paid too much attention to them. And I regret that. And I think I hope a lesson is learned. I mean, this story turns out to be, you paraphrase, I'm paraphrasing too, a big nothing. And we spent months on it. Hillary Clinton very likely lost the election because of it.
A mea culpa from the media. It's our fault Hillary lost. We should have just buried the Hillary email scandal because it helped Trump win. That, my friends, is CNN circa 2019. Now, speaking of presidential election losers, how about the newly minted senator from Utah, Mitt Romney, so disfigured by jealousy that he lost and Trump won, just like the late John McCain, loser to Obama the first time in 2008. Romney felt compelled to make a grandiose speech on the Senate floor attacking his own president.
The decision to abandon the Kurds violates one of our most sacred duties. It strikes at American honor. What we have done to the Kurds will stand as a blood stain in the annals of American history.
You know, you wonder if Romney has even spoken with any ordinary Americans who care a lot more about the American troops standing in the way of an invading army than Kurds they know nothing about. But Romney was made to look really bad when Trump announced what he called a permanent ceasefire in the region, while admitting the word permanent is a relative term in that tinderbox region of the world. But Mitt was made to look even worse, or even a laughingstock, after an enterprising reporter discovered that Romney has a secret identity on Twitter, which became great fodder for late-night comics like Jimmy Fallon.
Mitt Romney has been using a secret Twitter account where he supported himself and criticized President Trump, and goes by the name, this is real, Pierre Delecto. What? Wow. Pierre Delecto. Sounds like an evil chef at Au Bon Pain. You know, Romney's been running the account since 2011. Yep, Pierre Delecto is 8 years old and loves Twitter. He's just like the president.
Yeah, and Romney thinks he should be the president, to the point that he's willing to attack a president of his own party while his political enemies try to remove that president from office. Talk about a useful idiot. Idiotic enough to think the GOP will take his side against Trump, and idiotic enough to think the American people side with him and the Washington uniparty war machine. And the latest thing Trump said that has Democrats all hot and bothered, enraged as usual, was the president saying he was the victim of a lynching by impeachment-hungry Democrats. They say that word can only be used by black people. But going back to Joe Biden at the Clarence Thomas-Anita Hill clash in 1988, and then Biden and other leftists during the impeachment of Bill Clinton 21 years ago, let's see how the Democrats were characterizing things back then.
What this is all about is the lynching of an uppity black man. If that is not stereotypical lynching of a black woman, what is?
History is going to question whether or not this was just a partisan lynching.
And indeed, it is a political lynching.
Political lynch mob.
I will not vote for this lynching.
Whoops, hypocrisy alert. We used lynching, but Trump's not allowed. Meanwhile, the NBA continues to reel under the weight of horrendous publicity about throwing the Houston Rockets general manager Daryl Morey under the bus for supporting the freedom protesters in Hong Kong. Last week, superstar LeBron James sought to silence Morey, warning him not to speak ill of the NBA's Chinese overlords. But this week, retired superstar Shaquille O'Neal said LeBron was wrong.
We as American people, we do a lot of business in China, and they know and understand our values, and we understand their values. And one of our best values here in America is free speech. We're allowed to say what we want to say, and we're allowed to speak up about injustices, and that's just how it goes. And if people don't understand that, that's something that they have to deal with. Daryl Morey was right. Whenever you see something wrong going on anywhere in the world, you should have the right to say, that's not right, and that's what he did.
Now we'll see whether the NBA commissioner tries to shut down Shaq. We close with the kind of statement that once would have shocked the nation's sensibilities, but now gets shrugged off because Trump-deranged leftists in the media and politics have said things like it so often. But stop for a moment and consider how incendiary this remark is by a man who wants to be president of the United States, Beto O'Rourke.
President Trump, perhaps inspired by Goebbels and the propagandists of the Third Reich, seem to employ this tactic that the bigger the lie, the more obscene the injustice, the more dizzying the pace of this bizarre behavior, the less likely we are to be able to do something about it.
Trump as Joseph Goebbels, the notorious Nazi. Apparently they've tired of calling Trump Hitler, so now they've moved one notch down the list of reviled Nazis. That is your Democratic Party, 2019. Quick break, and then we're back to discuss the rapidly growing threat of social media censorship of conservatives with Brent Bozell.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
There is no way to understate the effect of social media censorship of conservatives who are now attempting to fight back and hold Facebook, Google, Twitter, and others accountable. And as we bring back Brent Bozell, the founder and president of the Media Research Center and the nation's leading media watchdog, he says we need to understand that a majority of the social media shutdown of conservatives comes from a bias not of commission, but omission.
But the bias by omission would be a censorship by omission against conservatives is concerned you don't see it happen. Let me give you an example. If you go on the Google search engine searching for something, by definition, you are ignorant of that subject, on that subject, else you would not have gone on Google. You were going there to learn about the subject. If you key in topic X and you see on the front page, which, by the way, overwhelmingly, people go, 97% of the people stop at the first page because they get the information they wanted. And if you see that information that you wanted is such that you accept it, but you don't know that A, it's a far left interpretation of the issue, and B, the conservative side of it has either been defanged or defanged or defamed, one or the other. If you are unaware of that sort, you'll never know what it was that hit you, which is why studies have been done. This Professor Robert Epstein did a study a couple of years ago that found that just by manipulating that front page, Google says it can't manipulate algorithms. Nonsense. Of course it can.
Of course they can.
But by manipulating those algorithms, you could actually, by manipulating just that page, you could sway 20% of the undecided voters in any election.
Well, the other day I went and looked up Ukraine Biden on a Google search, and it took me till the third page to find a story that was actually about Biden and Hunter Biden and their activity in Ukraine. Now, Brent...
But Tim, the point was you're knowledgeable because you live and breathe this sort of thing. And this is not a knock. Right. 95% of Americans aren't. They worry about other things in their lives.
Right.
So they rely on this, just like they rely on the CBS Evening News, to be honest, with their report. So when they have manipulated that data, so you saw just what you reported, well, what happens? It moves the voter perspective against the president, and it does exactly what this liberal professor, I might add, who, by the way, has done another study, and now he's pushing the numbers up to 30 and 40%.
I believe it. But it also seems, Brent, like not everyone in the conservative movement's completely on board in recognizing this censorship threat. Are you finding it relatively easy or difficult to find allies willing to expose this kind of censorship and fight against it?
It's so uncanny, the parallels between what we're trying to do now with social media, with what we did when we opened the doors of the Media Research Center 32 years ago. When we began, you had the overwhelming amount of Americans believed there was no such thing as a bias in the media. When we began, we had nothing going up against a multi-billion-dollar institution. And when we began, people looked to us, those who were concerned about it, looked to us to do something about this. Today, it's the same thing. You've got some people on the right have no concern about this. They haven't been shadow banned that they know of. You know, when you have four people who are shadow banned in the House, and they all happen to be conservative Republicans, 3 of the 4 of them being members of the Freedom Caucus, I don't know. I sense a little trend there.
Just a little bit.
But you know, if you don't know you've been shadow banned, now you think your message is getting out, and it isn't. By definition, you don't know you've been shadow banned. So there are a lot of people who are just dismissing this because it hasn't happened to them. Even if it hasn't happened to them, that doesn't mean it's not happening. It just means they've dodged a bullet, or they are irrelevant in the conversation.
That is Brent Bozell, ready to take up the fight against censorship of conservatives on social media. We will take a quick break and then come back to analyze the only 2 items on the Democrats' agenda these days: impeachment and the Kurds.
Where can you find honest political commentary? With sobering analysis.
Even the most trusting among us may find a company's latest plan deeply intrusive.
Accountability.
Perhaps it's time to start asking the right questions.
Deconstructing threats to our liberty.
Unparalleled insight into important stuff.
And boldly reporting the truth.
Truth is making a comeback.
Well, hello again, and welcome to Election 2020 Roundtable.
Uprising podcast of LibertyNation.com.
Abortion is functionally sexist.
From my cold, dead hand.
Subscribe to the LibertyNation.com YouTube channel, where facts matter.
Click on youtube.com/LibertyNation.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Impeachment and the Kurds are just about all we're hearing about on the political front these days. How will the secret impeachment inquiry on Capitol Hill and the president's controversial decision to withdraw some troops from Syria in light of a pending invasion by Turkey affect the flagging political fortunes of Democrats? Joining us to discuss this is political columnist from LibertyNation.com, Joe Schaeffer. Hello, Joe.
Hello, Tim. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you. Let me put you in the perhaps uncomfortable position of being a Democrat at this point, and you're looking at the impeachment process, and you're saying, you're weighing whether going forward with a vote on impeachment is a good idea in the long run with a presidential election next year or not. What do you, as a sort of mainstream Democrat, think about that?
As a mainstream Democrat, I would honestly be thinking the party is losing its soul. They are aligning with this establishment agencies that they supposedly have demonized Republicans with for decades. You know, the Bushes and the Romneys are all part of this deep state. Well, now they're part of the deep state. So politically, it's not going to be effective. and they're losing their soul as they're just becoming a wing of this swamp in Washington, D.C.
Well, then there's the issue that may separate the political establishment from the regular people as much as anything else, Joe, and that is foreign policy, and particularly this decision to withdraw troops from Syria with an invading army of thousands of Turks heading over the border into northern Syria. The president withdraws anywhere from, it's hard to tell, anywhere from 20 to 1,000 troops. We don't know exactly. And Capitol Hill went ballistic. Do you think that people in the heartland and flyover country are worried about the fate of the Kurds?
I mean, we know the answer. It's absolutely crazy. If they're trying to win an election, none of this makes sense. This country is so beyond fatigued with endless war. And they came up with some crazy excuses to justify us being in Afghanistan for all these years, and why we had to go and conquer Iraq, which just caused chaos in the Middle East. And now they're trying to explain the national security and the necessity of defending the Kurds in a part of the world most Americans can't even point to on a map. If you're trying to win an election, again, tying yourself into this, it's just a disaster. The American people want a secure United States border. They're not really worrying about what's going on halfway across the world.
Well, what the Democrats have done in condemning Trump's move in Syria is to continue to position themselves incredibly as the party of war. They are the ones that seem to attack President Trump for weakening the American presence in the world. Did I miss something, or isn't that the kind of policy that the Democrats have been endorsing, withdrawal from foreign lands as often as possible over the last, half century?
Yep. None of this makes any sense if you're going based on actual beliefs. But are these people motivated by beliefs? They seem to be only motivated by power. And whatever it takes for them to get power is what they'll go along with. And they'll do a complete 180 on their positions if they have to. I know we're not going to have a long discussion here, but I wish people would realize how connected this latest Trump impeachment thing in the Ukraine is with interventionist American foreign policy positions. Breitbart had some great stories this week about the Atlantic Council's ties to all of this. And they are the biggest NATO cheerleading organization. They are globalists. They are interventionists. And the supporters, the financial supporters, corporate partners to the Atlantic Council, CNN, Reuters, Thompson, all these ostensible neutral journalists who are telling us Trump needs to be impeached are in bed with these organizations that want us to have this stridently anti-Russian, stridently interventionist U.S. foreign policy. And these so-called liberal Democrats who never trusted the machine, hate the Pentagon, all that stuff, they just go right along with it. It's absolutely amazing.
It really does speak of a uniparty power block in Washington, doesn't it? Now, in terms of the Democrats' presidential race, Joe Biden was leading for a long time. Then with Ukraine and other issues and his health and all the gaffes and everything, Democrats found him wanting and vaunted Elizabeth Warren to the position of front runner. Now they're having second thoughts about her. Biden is back in the lead, perhaps by default. And the question seems to be arising, do we have anybody in the Democratic Party who can beat Donald Trump? And so I have to ask you the question, because the name has arisen afresh, Hillary Clinton. Is it even possible that she would jump into this race? And if not, somebody else? Can the Democrats win with who they've got in the field now?
Yeah, it's interesting. You've been asking me this question for a couple of weeks now, and it is a popular narrative. The establishment mouth organ, the Judge Report, and how funny is it to call them that? That's exactly what Matt Judge has become. Yes. Had it as their lead story. Is there anybody else? And these Democrats are asking themselves, we don't think any of these people can defeat Trump. So there's Hillary's opening. Can she exploit it? I don't think so. I think the hostility that would be arrayed against her if she got into the race would be too much to overcome. But she wants to do it. And I don't think she really cares about what's best for the Democratic Party. She cares about what's best for Hillary Clinton. So she may do it. I don't think she'll defeat Trump. I don't think anyone on the horizon is out there who can defeat Trump. A lot of it is because of what we just discussed about. If they're going to be the party of the swamp, and Trump was elected to destroy the swamp, they're making it very easy for Trump to take them down in 2020.
All right. Thank you, Joe. We'll pick up the conversation next week.
Thank you.
That's Joe Schaeffer, LibertyNation.com political columnist.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
And now we welcome you into the portion of Liberty Nation Radio, which we entitle Talkin' Liberty. I guess you could call it our signature segment.
Mom does, Tim.
Oh, I forgot to say what is our signature segment, but that's all right. This is a second signature.
For the more cultured listener, too.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, we save the best
show.
for last
Yeah.
and all that kind of stuff.
Sure.
Okay, sure. Got it out of your system. Scott Cosenza,
They don't
ladies
open
and gentlemen.
for me, Tim, okay? Or rather, I don't open for them. They open for me. I screwed that up.
Yeah, you're there all
Sorry.
week. You're here all week. Okay. We just spent 30 seconds we'll never get back, Scott. More importantly, 30 or now approaching 40 seconds of our listeners' time that they'll never get back. So let's dive right into a story you covered for LibertyNation.com.
What a doozy, Tim.
Free speech unlawful for Connecticut kids. Basically, they were arrested for saying a word.
That's right. They said the N-word. Various news stories I've read said that they shouted it, Tim, but my investigation reveals no instance of shouting it. In fact, the exact opposite. They were playing a juvenile game amongst themselves. These are two college kids, drunk and walking home from the bars early one morning or late at night, as you may change it. And they had played this game where they would say some vulgar word, and whoever, at sort of very loud volume, and whoever didn't match the volume kind of lost the game, right? A juvenile prank. And then one of them switched to the N-word, but he didn't shout it, Tim. In fact, he whispered it or spoke softly it. Mm-hmm. And the person who called the police on these students, in fact, was recording them with video and didn't hear what they said and had to use post-production video techniques to boost the audio. And only then did they hear it. They called the police, and the police arrested them and charged them with violation of a Connecticut law that basically it says that you can't disparage someone based on certain...
What?
Yeah.
How do you put that in law?
Ridicule. It's an anti-ridicule law.
And who gets to determine what ridicule is?
Well, you don't legally do so, if that's what you're saying. Look, how can you do so consistent with First Amendment and notions of free speech?
Yeah, the
answer
issue
is
of
that
the
you
First
can't. But if you don't care about that, and instead what you care about is being progressive or woke, then it doesn't matter, and you get to just do whatever you want. And I didn't read the men's name who were arrested because I don't think it's fair to... that they should be tarnished and followed around for the rest of their lives with this. But Thomas Katsoulias is the name of the Yukon president, and it seems like he's got his prints all over this in terms of the direction of where this went with an actual custodial arrest with jail time possibility for these students.
So, arrested for saying a word. Does that mean this is a hate crime? Is that what is being called, or is it the equivalent of that?
Well, I think the jails would be full if they started arresting black guys who said that word. So I don't know how these people identify, but that's the idea, is that it's somehow hateful.
But the whole idea of a hate crime is a subjective judgment to begin with. It doesn't say whether you broke the law or how you broke it.
You offer that like it's a powerful rebuttal against wokeness, Tim. That's no rebuttal against it.
I just don't... No. I've never understood it.
It's only a powerful rebuttal if you care about, logic and consistency and those sorts of things.
Who needs that?
Yeah, no.
A New Orleans lawyer has sued the State Bar Association over the use of his dues for lobbying efforts. Now, this strikes me, Scott, as like the right to work debate that we've had in this country, and unions where some members say they don't want to pay the dues because some of it's going to a political cause that they don't support, but the union leadership does.
New Orleans lawyer Randy Boudreaux is our hero, Tim.
Perfect name for New Orleans.
Yes.
It's got to be.
And I don't even know if I should lead with this. It's a data point. He happens to be a gay guy, and so he sort of runs anti to the progressive notion that the politics is unifying, and he finds that the political pronunciations from the bar of Louisiana are not something that he wants to engage in. So he's compelled, as all lawyers are who are active members of their bar, you got to pay dues to the bar. The Bar Association takes that money, and in some instances around the country, they use that money to lobby, for instance, for political purposes,
Right.
support political candidates in different ways, not direct contributions often, but in softer ways that pass legal muster. And he's saying that this is a compelled speech against his First Amendment rights. If they need, he's not saying they can't take his money to allow him to practice law, but he's saying they can't take it and then spend it on political speech because that means it's compelled speech.
Now, I know that the unions protect themselves, just like the Bar Association is, I'm sure, here, by saying that they're protecting the interests of the greater union, and they do that by contributing to Democrats. Okay, so the question is...
Also, actually, I think, Tim, you make a mistake by not going more granular. The specific Democrats that are their friends, because it's not just that they just give money to Democrats. For them, it's even much more than that. It's much more insidious. In other words, to the accrual of their specific benefit. They get to be the kingmaker,
Now,
right?
I could understand if they followed a corporate model where so many corporations give lavish contributions to candidates of both parties because they want to be at the table whoever wins. But with unions and with the Bar Association, it's not like that. They take sides, and that's a big difference.
Tim, I'm pretty biased here. I can say that any campaign against the governing fathers of a bar association is good news as far as I'm concerned.
You're one of those rogue Federalist Society types, Scott. Oh, boy. Let the word go forth. Scott's a Fed. He's a Fed. Now, the White House. You knew we had to hit the White House at some point, but they are suing California over a cap and trade deal with Quebec, where I was last weekend. And here's the thing. This is a matter of California essentially whether they have the ability to have their own state foreign policy with a foreign entity, in this case, one province in Canada.
Mon Dieu, Tim.
Oh, nicely done. How long did you have to rehearse that one?
Impromptu. That's how I roll.
I'm sure. Yeah.
You know, when I first saw the headline, I was reading about this story, I thought I couldn't quite get to what it was about in terms of, like, why would somebody from California, why would the Quebecois, like, burn the calories to create this, I don't have any coastal agreements with anybody who lives in California over my gas mileage or anything like that.
Mine actually expired.
Right.
So yeah.
Your sister city arrangement with somebody in another.
Yeah, it ran out.
So if you peel the onion one layer back, though, all these stories, by the way, they just talk about the emissions and the emissions. Well, this is about money. It's about the ability of the California authorities to extract tax money from people. Okay, what they did was they established this cap and trade deal, which says. They just created this new rule, which is that, hey, if you emit carbon into the atmosphere in some way through productive activity, a manufacturing facility, whatever,
course. Yeah.
You now have to pay us for the right to do so. Just a made up thing. You now have to pay. It's like if you breathe air, you have to pay us. We're enforcing these clean air rules. Like that would be the functional equivalent. And the federal government is saying. No, you can't just create this with Canada, this sort of...
What's the deal with it anyway? I mean, why would they want to have, they're like a challenge between the province of Quebec and the state of California?
What they want to do is... No, they just want... So the right way to think about this, Tim, and I'm not being hyperbolic, is to think of it in a classic, like, mob collection scheme. You win when everybody's on board with the same scheme, right? Like, they need other government actors to be like, yeah, we're in on this scheme too. We're going to enforce these rules too. They're our friends. And California would like it if every state did this. They don't care. It's not like they want other people to get in on the goodness of this scheme. They just think it's going to be successful if everybody does it. And they just want the money. It's about taking that money from the producers. That's what this allows them to do. And that's why I think the Trump administration is in opposition to it.
Certainly you're not suggesting that the left's goal is to shut down industry far and wide.
You know,
are you?
It's going to be a really bad thing when they run out of other people's money in California, and I think that's going to come sooner rather than later.
They're headed for a crash. How sustainable is it? They're driving the entire middle class out of California. If you're really rich or really poor, you're in the money in California.
That's
you're
right.
all set for
you gotta
life.
Be one of the two.
So you either
no.
You're either uber wealthy or you work
not for
menial
life.
jobs for them
until
until
the reckoning comes.
Yeah, until the reckoning comes. And any economy, whether it be a federal, state, or county, a sound economy is based on a sound what? Middle class.
Yeah.
And there is none in California because they're being driven out by taxes and regulations and all the full California regalia
by progressive
craziness.
Political policies.
And the Republicans, by the way, have no footprints on anything that happens in California because they've been crushed. They've been overwhelmed. The Democrats dominate every element of state and federal politics in California. So anything that goes wrong, good luck trying to blame the Republicans, which is the usual talking point. Let's move a little bit north to the great state of Montana, whose Supreme Court has reversed a decision on a gun ordinance in the town of Missoula.
I just thought this was a good story because I think it's important that we always recommend or always recognize, rather, that the state Supreme Courts are also a place that we should go. We should be expected to protect our individual rights, not just the federal courts. And so much is done in the federal courts. But in states where some justices have their mind right, Tim, if I'm biased, there is a 5-0 decision striking down a Missoula gun ordinance would require background checks on all firearms. And I just think, we need to be able to press for civil rights in both the federal courts and the state courts, and it's a big win in Montana.
Do you think the momentum for more and more gun control that occurred after the most recent tragedies has died down a bit, or is it still at a frenzied pace?
I think it is broad and shallow support. I don't think those people will go out to the polls and be single-issue voters like the people who want to keep the guns are. And that's why I think that they are perpetually behind in that political movement.
Well stated. Protecting your liberty, Scott Cosenza.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us. That's it for this edition of Liberty Nation Radio. But a reminder that you can catch the podcast of this program at libertynation.com. And we also have the podcast of The Uprising, our podcast hosted by Scott, plus The Rabbit Hole, Politics and Prose, where past is prologue. So that's it for now, but don't worry, we'll be back with you next week, same time, same station. Till then, this is Tim Donner saying, stand up for liberty. And we'll see you next time on Liberty Nation Radio.